the other side is the quantum sensing, which basically, again, using quantum technology to look inside the body. Sport Integrity Australia was invited to the workshop, and clearly they are thinking about using that technology for the detection of substances that otherwise wouldn't be able to be detected. But then our chief medical officer was interested in concussion space. The biggest challenge was that right now the majority of quantum technology it's very big. Whatever you're trying to look into your brain, they are like a room size. Because of some requirement related to cooling, you need to lower the temperature to extremely low temperature and with some precision. And again, the size is very big. But 50 years ago, computers were very big, and now we carry a computer in our pockets.
Well, hello, folks. Welcome to the support. Joined by Paolo Menaspa. Paolo has a rich career working at the forefront of athlete support, helping athletes and coaches across multiple Olympic cycles, and especially in the sport of cycling. And now he leads the science operation as Chief Science Officer at the Australian Institute of Sport. A very warm welcome to you, Paolo. How are you?
Thank you, Steve, for the invitation. I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for the intro.
Hey, look, it's late there in Australia. You just packed the kids off to bed. Thanks for making the time to speak. Everything all right with you?
It is. And I have an eye on the living room in case they walk in, hopefully. It doesn't happen, but they are in bed, yes.
Good. Well, I've got the dog just sat behind me, so we're both on monitor duties there. Look, I've given people a bit of a brief background in your introduction there, but could you fill in some of the details about how you started, how you progressed, who you've worked with?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned cycling, and potentially I'll mention that cycling has been an integral part of my life as a participant first. I got very young, like under 19, but I got the opportunity to represent Italy, which gave me a miniature insights into high performance sport. Just because I mentioned my participation into sport, I might mention that I then at university I did play rugby union at probably the lowest level in Italy, so there's no need to talk how low that level is. But again, a bit of insights into the very different worlds of team sport. I actually remember being shocked for a number of things about the concentration and the focus. And, in cycling, you sit in the bunch for 5 hours and I was a sprinter, you wait till the end. It's very different in a team sport where you need to pay attention every minute. And then I studied sports science. I was lucky enough that one of my teacher professor was Aldo Sassi, a famous cycling coach, and I guess that's how my career started, because I asked him if I could do my thesis with him, and so I started to go to the MAPEI, or that's how I pronounce it. Probably in English it would be more MAPEI. It was at the lab linked to the professional cycling team to do my data collection and to start to get into the applied sport science. That was around 2005. Stayed there probably 7-8 years, and then eventually, I guess when Green Edge started as a team. I thought there was potentially time to expand or try something new. That would have been 2012-ish. And that's where I started my PhD. I mean, the connection was with Dave Martin. A lot of Australian coaches and scientists used to come to the MAPEI lab because Aldo Sassi, I should say, was actually the coach of Cadel Evans. So a lot of, people from the Australian Institute of Sport would come to the lab. Michael Roger was another Australian athlete in the lab. So clearly I got introduced to the big names when it comes to Australian cycling and probably cycling in general. And so I got in touch with Dave Martin. I proposed to have an experience overseas. And that's how I got into my PhD. Which then...
PhD in Australia with Dave?
In Australia. I did my PhD at Edith Cowan University in Perth. My supervisor was Chris Abyss, my uni supervisor, and it was an industry-based PhD. And the industry was a joint between the AIS, the Australian Institute of Sport, and Cycling Australia. So I spent the majority of my time in Adelaide, where the track program is during the European summer in Europe with the road program. So I kind of was alternating the track program in the Australian summer and the road program in the European summer, which actually gave me like a number of years of summer to summer, back to back.
Yeah, very nice. Good
Not bad.
arrangement.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. Then I eventually worked for Cycling Australia a number of years until when more recently I moved to the AAS in my current role.
And so that industry PhD, you said you were based in Perth, but most of the time in Adelaide. So fundamentally, you were an applied scientist as you're going through your formal scientific training, as opposed to maybe a research scientist with maybe some small field trips.
Yeah, that is correct. I don't know if it's a common model, but it was common around the AIS probably 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I did it. So the university provides the academic supervision and a salary, etc. But then the industry provide pretty much the field where you can collect the data. So that's the reason why you're allowed from a university point of view to travel, to follow the athletes for your data collection. Often the sport sees it as the benefits of having a sports scientist traveling with the athletes. So there is like this kind of a win-win-win situation where you're collecting information, answering questions from the sport, at the same time publishing paper, trying to grow knowledge in areas that are of interest for the sport.
Yeah. And so then you spent a period of time with the Australian cycling team. So that was a national team. So that was more Olympic, Paralympic focus, I presume.
Yes, that is correct. That would have been 2012 to 2015. Well, that end of 14, the transition at the end of the PhD, there have been some changes within the Cycling Australia, and with someone moving to the Green Edge team. Eventually, actually, my contract kind of kept going in a very similar arrangement, but the agreement became a postdoc between Green Edge and Edith Cowan University. That was 2015 to 2018. So for 3 years, my focus was more kind of switched from the national team to Green Edge, and then doing the research for Edith Cowan. Was mostly with the women team, but the work was across the development team, the women team, and partially with the men.
And so in that role at that time, what was the focus? What was sort of your top priority? Was it to generate knowledge or answer specific questions around a project or a hypothesis that had been stated or funded? Or was it more broadly to support the cyclists in a range of topics as their hands-on scientist or physiologist?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Now, I haven't reflected as much about it, but I would say that the second the second option is more similar to what the situation was like. The team would have seen me as a performance support practitioner, and I would say that in my career I went from being a bit of a specialist to more of a generalist, and now I'm probably even more of a generalist when I hear conversation about every sport, and I know very little about all of it. But again, back then, probably one of my strengths was having connection with experts. Having done my PhD around the AIS, but now being based in Europe with that Green Edge team, my ability was to listen in and connect with the expert based on what the problem was, whether the problem is, we work on Caleb Ewan's aerodynamics position, we had connection with the wind tunnel, someone else nutrition, etc. Mostly in that function.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge, isn't it? Where I think a lot of people have this sort of narrowing as they go through their education, and they get into the real world, and they're just broadening and broadening. And I suppose one of the key strengths of applied practitioners over the years is to know a little bit about something and have their niche areas that they can really go through the gears. But I've got something to say about everything, but I've also got a really great network that if I need depth or I need to go even further, I've got access to resources, human or the scientific literature.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. I do feel like that my strength has been the ability to identify the problem and not being shy in saying, you know what, I don't know, give me 24
Yeah.
hours, I'll come back to you. So yeah, even today, I mean, I do ask daily for feedback, and I'm sure there are, you know, in almost every conversation I have, there's someone who knows way more than me, whatever the theme is. You know, these days is statistics or quantum computing, and I'm never the smartest person in the room, probably not even the second, but I don't shy away from connecting and asking questions and trying to learn.
I think it's the confidence to say I don't know is actually critical at various different stages of your career. I think it's important that people recognise that it could be that genuinely I've got a gap in knowledge, or genuinely I don't think we've encountered this type of question before, and therefore there's a curiosity to it.
Yeah, which is actually it's a good point. I mean, it's not rare that athletes come up with some great
Yeah.
questions, which I think generally nobody actually knows the answer. So yeah, it's great to have the ability to interact with athletes because they are very curious minds and a constant source of inspiration.
Yeah. And so then fill in the gaps for us in terms of going from that hands-on role as support and researching to the role that you serve now, but also could you tell us a little bit about what you do now too?
Yeah. I guess the gap have been like what I describe now was my role with as a performance that performance support role with Green Edge. But then from 2018, and I feel like it was a good, probably nice progression. I became head of performance solutions back with the Cycling Federation. That was with under Simon Jones, who's like the performance director with all cycling, and that gave me well, probably was the first time where I was actually managing a decent sized team with a lot of specialists. So I stepped out of being the specialist and communicating daily with the athletes. I was communicating with the specialists and the coaches. I was kind of in between. And part of my job was to try to understand the bigger problem, what contributes to performance, and try to prioritize. You're always, wherever you are, my feel or my view would be that you are in a constrained resources situation. And so I kind of had to quickly understand the importance of prioritizing and working in a multi and interdisciplinary team. I think discipline experts and subject matter experts often see their and probably have done it too, like their mother as the most important one, which is I don't see is a problem. I see, like I actually, you know, you want to work with people that they think they area of expertise is the most important, the most impactful, because it means that they are excited and they push for it and they learn and they study, they improve. However, again, when you're in reality in front of athletes, a competition, you can't do everything. You know, sometimes now, I mean, as an example, in a competition, you may have a certain amount of recovery between the semis and the final, and you can't do everything. You either decide to do some strategy to recover or get ready for the next competition, and which one is better, it's difficult to know. And maybe actually this is a good laying into my current role. In my current role, we, among other things, we're trying to coordinate, and we developed this is 2 years ago, a research agenda. We looked into the priority for research for the following 4 years, and one of the themes that came out was pretty much exactly that, the kind of performance prioritization, optimization, but in a competition environment where we were trying to highlight the importance of understanding the context. A lot of research for very good reason, and it's important research, and we need that research. What happens in isolation, where you're looking, for instance, at a single supplement, an 8-time trial with some very specific constraints around it and set duration, etc. But the reality of the sport field, you know, completely different. And sometimes you have multiple interests and you're trying one supplement, but also other strategies at the same time. You need to listen to the coach, etc. So I guess I started with a very narrow example of something that we've done recently, as in that's one of the theme in our research agenda, but developing that has been like an important first step when I started in my role. That was a kind of goal, KPI, something I was given from the previous CEO when I started. This is June 2021. So it's now 3 years ago, and there was this idea that we need to really prioritize what the research area of interests are. And my approach has been to try to learn from other fields, back to the maybe I don't know, but give me 24 hours and I'll find out how we can do it. Sometimes it takes more than 24 hours, but for instance, there are many examples on how to conduct research agenda prioritization frameworks or approaches. So we looked into, what does the World Health Organization do? WHO, how do they prioritize? So we look at their approach, other approaches. Clearly, you need to cut it down based on resources, time frame, etc. But what the important thing, which by the way, won't be in any way surprising to you, but actually you need to listen basically to your stakeholder, to your athletes, to your coaches. So that was my initial proposition. We need to actually interview and listen to athletes and coaches, which I think was welcome. I didn't know, but back then at the AIS there was a perception that sometimes the research are driven by the researchers, which again potentially is not bad. And I've seen great research conducted by researchers with their own idea. I think curiosity is important. We all come up with great questions, and there is so much interesting stuff that we could look into it. But there is a point where you try to go from the interesting to the impactful. Something which is interesting for me might not be impactful for the athletes. So we kind of, with the research agenda, we try to put forward what is important and impactful for athletes and coaches.
So can I pick you up on that, and maybe if you're able to just give us a little bit more about how you have gone about prioritizing? What's the most powerful voice? Is it the coaches, the athletes? Is it the probability of creating impact that might relate to medals? Is it developing that specialism? How do you go about prioritizing the impact, the feasibility, the receptivity in sports to be able to actually collect data on world-class athletes, so it's not too much of a leap to make the application? What's your process there?
Yeah. Thank you. So it's a great question, big question. I'll try to go through some of the steps that we follow. But so to begin with, one of the principles was to ensure that we were going to ask an open question. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of asking a leading question, and which I'll try not to give an example because I don't want to have any bias or show any bias. But again, the question was, what should science or research look into for the future? Thinking about Brisbane or thinking about so a very open question, broad themes. And the AIS already had a number of groups, like an advisory group, an athlete advisory group, coaching, and other representative. So we used some of those groups as an initial stakeholder. I think we had up to 150 participants to give the first list, and with that, and there was an open number of answers that they could give. Some gave single word, someone a long sentence, and then we had an internal panel of experts or researcher, people working in performance support, which simply had the role of combining similar answers, because as you can imagine, you can have a lot of overlapping answers. So we combined these, I can't remember how many, but 150 people. We could have had roughly 400 answers. Many of those were overlapping. We ended up with 80 themes. Those 80 themes, then we went back to a different group in this case, and we got the method from another prioritization framework, where there was this the principle was the one to have equal input from different kind of stakeholders. If I remember the numbers, we had 6 for each group, and there were 5 groups. I would have been athletes, coaches, performance support, researchers, and probably managers, something along the line. Anyway, this framework suggested to have, in this phase, to have equal weight for those groups. And the question was to rank the 80 themes. Ranking versus rating, it's a clearly different approach, but it allows to force people to think what is important. We've seen before, like we had seen instances where if you ask, between 0 and 5, you end up with a lot of 3, 3.5, and when you average, if someone says 1, someone else says 5, you end up with a lot of score which are really very similar. And if you then rank after the rating, you end up with probably some statistical noise. Like you don't have the power of the ranking. Asking people basically again, what's number 1 versus number 80, acknowledging that the ranking part. You go. Sorry.
Could you just give a couple of examples of the themes? Were these intervention specific, this supplementation, or was it problem solving warm up, for example, or training balance between high and low intensity? What was the example, or was it more about, look, just focus on making an impact?
No, another great question. So those 80, they were like relatively detailed. They would have been focused on this intervention, which then after the ranking, we used like a tool to map. That was prior to large language models, but there was this tool that allowed us to map basically. No, it's different from a word clouds. Things that have similar meaning, they were put in the same category.
Clustering.
Yeah, thank you. A clustering approach, which then was confirmed by the expert, by they provide support to that clustering. And with that, we end up with 4 major themes. So the 80 recommendations were more details, but we end up with 4 major themes following that clustering. Basically, they are the foundation of our current research agenda, which, by the way, at the end of the Paralympic Games, which is yesterday when we are recording, our plan is also to review it, because the previous agenda was done in the lead up to Paris, and the agenda itself talks about updating it at a 4-year cycles, because there might be new events, new technology. So we'll start a new process to update the agenda, which we might actually considering also reviewing the process, because I'm always for continuous improvement. I'm always after feedback. We received a lot of feedback, so we'll potentially again change and improve the process. Back to the current agenda, the 4 themes, and the title are a bit maybe not very. They sound a bit broad and generic and meaningless, but I'll mention them, and then I'll give you a bit of an insight of flavor. But the first one talks about successful athletes, and which is an interesting, I think, observation, putting the athletes as a first priority in the agenda. And then when we talk about successful athletes, there are some sub themes. They go from the talent identification and development to the holistic approach to again the development. There are the sub themes in the space of holistic, even health, physical health and mental health. There was an acknowledgement that a lot of the research, again for very good reasons, is done in separation. You have experts in mental health and physical health, and even when it comes to physical health, there's illnesses and injuries that are quite separated. So there was a bit of a call in trying to, and potentially coming from the athletes group, we are actually one, look after me rather than analyzing a single aspect. Under that successful athlete, there was also a call out to better understanding the requirements or the needs of a diverse athlete population. And that was described again in broad terms, but the meaning behind that is like pretty much all the minorities that sometimes are not, or oftentimes are not considered in traditional research, whether it's female athletes. Paralympic sport doesn't see as much research as Olympic sport, but in Australia there is an interest in First Nation athletes as well. So like there was a call into looking in all this aspect of these successful athletes. The second, and this is only the first one. Are you happy for me to keep going?
Keep going. I've got loads of questions.
No, the second theme was about coaching and the coach development. And based on what I heard, is that the first time that in Australia we actually, officially put coaching science in the spotlight. Doesn't mean that it hasn't happened before. There are great researchers working on coaching science and coach development. However, it was the first time that as a AIS there was actually again a call out. We need to know more about it, and that coaching science theme was also. And that results of the clustering was quite connected with the idea of skill acquisition, creating environments where athletes and coaches can learn, etc. In these learning environments. The third theme is the one actually I started first, is that athlete optimization, with the idea of doing research or allowing to understand the context of the competition. That again I mentioned a few minutes ago. The other concept or the other sub-theme within the athlete optimization is the idea of individualization of training, which again, nothing new, but there was a bit of a call from people from the stakeholder in saying we would like to better understand how can we deliver training plans that tailor to the needs of the athlete, which again, sometimes we heard that the limitation is as simple as dealing with team sport. People go out and train together, etc. But there was again that's the theme across sports. The fourth one maybe is even more broad and generic, but the title is practice enhancement. Practice enhancement was a call to trying to improve kind of everything we do with the use of science in an evidence-based approach. You would say like, well, that should be it anyway, but it's not always possible, not always easy. And one of the outcome of that was a specific call out to considering meta science, which is science on science, which we ended up having actually. So the agenda talks about meta science. In reality, we ended up with what we are referring to as a meta research program, which is a research on research. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna be boring with all the conversation we've had about the difference between meta science and meta research, which is which and why we're doing this versus that. But the idea is to understand what we are doing and improve the way we do things. And that meta research aspect or meta science themes also talk about using research and science to improve practice. Sorry, I should have said the practice enhancement. That's the theme. Using science to improve the way we deal with in the leadership space and in other area. The last sub theme within that is talks about implementation science. There's this concept. I don't think it's a concept. It's an old paper that shows that it takes 17 years from the research question to the doctor, the GP's desk, or being actually not from the desk technically to be implemented. So that's 17 years to translate a research paper, and acknowledging that we don't have 17 years before our home Olympic and Paralympic Games. There was this idea of we need to learn more about how to implement our own science.
Okay, let me pick off a couple of questions from that.
Yes,
that was super interesting about the different themes that came up. I think increasingly interesting that we're seeing pockets of acknowledgement of the whole athlete, and that they have to be well, or that our responsibility, our ethics and morals to support the athlete rather than just considering them some sort of product that produces power output and medals at a personal cost. Interesting that you flag individuality or individual approach. That's interesting that it's come out, because my observation is that certainly when you're coaching, you tend to look for shortcuts, and there's so many complex decisions to be made that you often revert to a known program rather than tailoring for every individual that's under your care or responsibility. Yes. Can I ask you? I've got three questions that come out of how you've explained that. The first is,
by the way, on how I explained it, Despite I've been, actively part of the one writing it, it's better written than the way I explained it, probably. I haven't read it in too long. I should reread it. It's published. I might send you a link, so if you want to share it, like we're quite proud of it. So I'll probably share it.
Amazing.
Yep.
I will include that in the notes. Okay, so you mentioned previously that a perception, and I would probably agree, rightly or wrongly, perception that the Australian Institute of Sport was a pretty good academic department, producing very good studies, very good researchers, applied in focus. What's your focus now in terms of the motivation for cohort-based studies, so that you have something that stands up to perhaps academic publishing standards, or increasing the objectivity in an individual athlete's journey, training, performance, so that you have a increased clarity of information about how they're progressing or what's happening in their life?
So that thank you. Trying to give you a brief answer. We are exploring with experts in research methods how to best approach the whole, and basically we're going, I would say, almost 180 degrees, as in we are considering N of one approaches to research, talking with world leading expert very far away from where I sit, but we are trying to understand how to better understand that, which is like your second part of the question. Basically, how to support the single athletes understand changes that are effective to the individual to then support the next decision, etc. But also we are considering at the other end big teams research. It's something that I'm not aware of a lot of it happening in sport. We've been looking, I think I can say it, I can certainly say those things exist, but there are a couple of programs. One is called Many Primates, and the other one is called Many Babies, where they're looking at, babies. Despite when I Googled Many Babies, actually I got all these red flags and, I couldn't access the web page. But I think it's manybabies.com. The idea is that babies are a difficult participant, because as many athletes, they are underage, so they can't give consent. The participation or the involvement sometimes is difficult to get participation. In that case of the Many Babies, they're looking at sometimes rare diseases. Anyway, I'll invite you to go on that website and see what they do. Again, it's better explained than the way I can explain it. But the idea is to create consortium where you can actually work as a big team to work on the question. Even that process starts with prioritizing the question to make sure that there is no to limit the research waste. There are a lot of publications showing that the research waste starts with answering the wrong question. So you start there. You understand what's the priority for your beneficiaries of research, and then you're trying to collect big data set. That big teams approach requires a fair bit of work into building the infrastructure, which allows to then collect the data and share the data and answer those bigger questions. We are not there, but we are exploring the spectrum. I suspect that if you want to improve and be better and be able to answer questions, I'm not going to say the old style publications with 6 and 8 participants is not the future. I mean, it can keep going, sometimes satisfy some criteria, but I don't think we should rely on that kind of research, which often is limited by the number of participants or athletes within a team. But we're trying to move on again. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, I mean, well, if I check if I've heard this correctly, but you're looking to increase the objectivity and standardization of certain measurements that you might apply to an athlete, and that you're looking at methods, presumably big data, AI approaches to be able to look for specific trends for how people are progressing. An answer to the questions that you're asking.
Yeah. Well, big data and AI are part of the conversation, but they're not. Yeah, the big team science is more about bringing together researchers in laboratory that would otherwise not collaborate to be able to share and create this network. Where again, instead of answering six different but similar questions. They come together, they agree on how to collect the data. And again, you mentioned the standardization. That's a part, a key component of that big team science, having shared protocols to ensure that, the same devices are used, or the same calibration techniques, and the same process for data collection happens, and then we can actually answer a question with more confidence.
Okay, next one of my three. So second question, and none of these I assume are going to be easy for you to answer. How do you balance short-term versus long-term? So short-term that might yield within a year or 4 years for hopefully benefit to a group of athletes, and something that has some longevity and or might not be possible to answer. We talked about 17 years from research publication to yield, but also kind of getting some of these ideas off the ground sometimes takes a long time. So how do you balance that when someone's paying for a science program? How do you balance the short and long?
Yeah. So generally speaking, I'd say, like, since the announcement of Brisbane 2032 was 10 years or 11 years, and now we are, probably under 8. But anyway, that gave us more opportunities to think about long term. For instance, I briefly touched on a couple of examples. We work with our like another science department within the Australian government to work on a document which we refer to as the mega trends in sport. So we looked at, again, what are the trends that are going to change participation and high performance, and those include the disruption of pandemic, and in the geopolitical changes, and like the increase in how do you say, like the sport, increased number of people practicing sport, etc. So anyway, there are I think there are 6 mega trends. I'm a co-author, but again, even that one I haven't read it in a while. But we came up, and it's published. We came up with 6 mega trends. And that's meant to actually have a look for the next 20, 40 years. It's an ambitious project. We will find out if we're right or not once we are retired. But that's an example of trying to look very long term. Another example of activities that I think we can embrace only because we have the game in 8 years. I guess for virtue of my job title, I'm part of a group. It's called a Government Scientists Group, which is chaired by Australia chief scientists, and there are chief scientists for each government agency. So like I generally listen and try to learn, but I sit with the chief scientist of defense, intelligence, the Bureau of Statistics, the Bureau of Meteorology, etc., etc. There are like 25 agencies. Anyway, last year, in conversation, basically the chief scientist of Australia expressed some interest in using sport to promote quantum technology. Australia has a past in quantum research, which, to be honest, I wasn't even aware, and I'm not a quantum expert. That doesn't need to be stated. But my job became to connect sport expert and coaches with quantum experts. So we had this. I think it was August 2023, where what we think it was the first that we are aware of workshop where quantum scientists met sport people. We actually had Olympians and Paralympians in the room, and the idea is to think long term. Nothing is going to move quickly in that space, but that, for example, led to the Queensland government opening a grant opportunity. They put 5 million, and the title is pretty much bringing quantum to the Brisbane 2032 games. So that's an example of trying to influence and think about long term. Whether it's going to be successful or not, it's all to be seen. Certainly, there is no benefits for any athletes in Paris, and probably not in LA, but something might happen. For sure, some dollars have been invested, and I'm sure that we'll learn something out of it. So this is the long term.
Could you give an example of the sorts of things you might be asking, or?
Yeah. So what I've learned is that the quantum science or quantum, generally there are 2 areas. One is quantum computing, and one is quantum sensing. Quantum computing is very, I didn't know, many were surprised, many in the sport area were surprised. The strength is not big data, for example, but it's doing many computation at the same time and solve basic logistical problem. Like if they solve issues like the traffic, or they do many permutations. One example was, everything in the logistical space. In sport, you think about organizing an Olympic Games or sending big teams overseas. All of those calculations can happen very quickly and in a way that is more efficient than the traditional computing. We have, maybe I'll stop there. The other side is the quantum sensing, which basically, again, using quantum technology to look inside the body. Sport Integrity Australia was invited to the workshop, and clearly they are thinking about using that technology for the detection of substances that otherwise wouldn't be able to be detected. But then our chief medical officer was interested in concussion space. The biggest challenge was that right now the majority of quantum technology, it's very big. Whatever you're trying to look into your brain, they are like a room size. Because of some requirement related to cooling, you need to lower the temperature to extremely low temperature and with some precision. And again, the size is very big. But 50 years ago, computers were very big, and now we carry a computer in our pockets. In the quantum side of things, the researchers, they were all excited, and they took the challenge.
Fascinating, really interesting. Okay, third question then.
Yeah.
How do you balance?
I can answer. Sorry.
Go on.
No, on the short term.
Oh,
so that
yeah.
I gave you a couple. Yeah, no. So
Yeah.
we had the opportunity to have some research grants, and in successive years, what we decided in a strategic way, we made them, to say in very lay terms, big and small. 1 year we gave up to $150,000 per grant. The following year, 50. The following year, up to $400,000, which made some project bigger and longer, and some other smaller and shorter. In 2023, we went with the $50,000 again on purpose, pretty much to achieve what you described, because almost all those projects were 12 months in duration. So we were able to support more projects because the total amount of funding was the same. So we were able to diversify, have more projects, but also smaller with a quicker turnaround.
Yeah, interesting. I'll come back to perhaps any thoughts on impact that you might have seen for Paris. Yeah. But if I could ask the third question.
Yes, please.
How do you balance, as I guess a leader of applied science, how do you balance what people want versus perhaps what people need?
Well, that's a great question. You're making me feel like probably first of all who's the people, because certainly there's still a lot of research that happen. A lot of research question coming from different stakeholders. Some, I'm trying not to get in trouble here, but something we do, they are like to answer questions that might come from government, or they might come from, like you have a requirement to look into a theme because it has been raised as important, whether athletes ask for it or not. I don't think I can. I think it's, if I use the well-being as an example, I mean, it probably has been forced a bit into athletes. Not many athletes 10 years ago would have asked you to look into their well-being. I'm guessing, and so as an example, so something you need to start them because they are important, and they kind of come a bit top down. Whether it's the government or the chief medical officer, or like someone says, we need to look into concussion, and other ones actually, again, they come bottom up, and so there is a call from athletes and coaches. They're curious, and they actually this emerges as something that we really need, because we think it's going to have an impact.
Yeah. Okay. And then how about when you're trying to make sure that scientific concepts are landed with coaches and athletes? I guess it's going to be fairly simple if a team have said, look, we want you to answer the question for us, to be able to then go and work on that. But equally, it might present challenging findings. You might need to introduce a new idea for coaches and athletes to grasp. How much of your focus is on the applied craft of translating and working with coaches and athletes to make sure that knowledge comes to life?
Yeah. So my current role is unfortunately, I don't know if but relatively sitting back from seeing athletes and coaches. But I would say part of my focus is there, but my role is, and again, I'm trying to say, no, no, I'm trying to say, I'm saying it's not my decision, was a call from, from a stakeholder anyway, a call for that implementation science I mentioned before. That's a answer your question. So having implementation science as a focus in the agenda and ensuring that that gets implemented with the right expert, it's the answer. Again, it's the answer to your question. So I'm not the person communicating the results to each athlete, to each coach, or to each sport, but we would like to better understand with real experts that often they might not even be in sport, how to, because implementing change is about behavioral, behavioral science. You need to people that understand how to, how to get people on board, etc. And sometimes it's communication, sometimes it's understanding the context and tailoring the message. Yeah. So have I answered it?
Yeah, I'm just curious
Yeah.
to know about how much of a focus, because I think over my career, I've seen some great brains with a really good grasp of
Yeah.
applied scientific concepts, but they haven't necessarily worked to develop trust for a coach. They haven't
Yeah. Yeah.
necessarily got the communication skills to be able to maybe weave a metaphor, to give an example,
No, no, it's
um,
perfect. So
to,
yeah.
to to build that capacity for them to say, therefore, I think this might be an approach you need to take, or this is an area that's worth your attention. When coaches have got their minds full of the complex decisions about athlete welfare, athlete training, athlete performance schedules, the scientist has to be very prioritized and effective in influencing that coach to
No,
maybe
thanks
make a
for the
change.
clarification. Yeah. No, I get it 100%. I have to say that my experience here in the Australian system, I see a lot of practitioners, whether they are DIS or we refer to it as the NIN, the National Institute Network. So
Okay.
Australia is a federal state. Every state has their own institute or academy of sport. And people working in that network, in the NIN, I think they're, yeah, generally speaking, very good at it. I'm quite comfortable that they're again skilled and able to translate and focus on it. In my role, my job is ensuring that when on the researcher side, when we fund a piece of research, we want like a proposal that includes a dissemination component. We want a proposal that includes a plan for measuring the impact of the research. So we moved on from not long ago, but still, it still happens. We get research proposal for support, etc., where the in the practical outcome, it's a publication, and when we say like, no, we actually need something a bit more tangible, and becomes a conference presentation. So that's where part of my role is devising guidelines or processes where the things cannot finish with a conference presentation, or not even an infographics, to be honest, because that's just a differently printed piece of paper. And so we are pushing hard. We are changing the guidelines to make sure that there is a plan for the implementation, which it might include involving the coach earlier on. I mean, I mentioned it before. It's also linked to the research waste, but you need to answer a question from a coach. And yeah, I think you said it too. If you're answering a question which is not relevant, it's more difficult to sell, but then probably you shouldn't sell it.
Yeah, or I don't know. I suppose it's a little bit like the Henry Ford. If you ask people what they want, they wanted faster horses. And I think that there probably needs to be a perspective that is multi-sport, that has the distance from the
Yeah, yeah.
coalface, that means that you are addressing problems, addressing areas that perhaps people aren't seeing or asking for. I think my memory of leading science teams, you ask people what they want, and they feel the pressures of their day.
Yeah.
Athletes are broken, so I want some physiotherapists. We're in a weight making sport, I want a nutritionist. We're in a high energetic sport, so therefore we want a physiologist. And so you ask people what they want, but then perhaps, and this is all due respect, there was certainly a lower appetite for biomechanics
Yeah, yeah.
because there's a high degree of logical mathematical understanding. to understand what the impact can
grasp
be.
it. Yeah.
And so I think the balance is an interesting one to be struck over time about what are the pressures you are seeing, but what are the ones that you're not seeing that offer you an opportunity.
Yeah. So there is one of the things we discuss about is actually and it probably goes back to that bottom up and top down, but when you ask athletes and coaches, one of the limitations is that, an athlete's career might finish within years, and a coach, often a contract, it goes with an Olympic cycle or Paralympic cycle. And so clearly their research questions are in that short term period, and so that could be a limitation. So that's, for example, one of the areas where, again, you try to bring in a different view. The other thing that you actually just made me think about is I think it's not worldwide as whether it's the exact same terminology, but what it takes to win approach, which basically is the concept of looking at the determinants of performance. And so that should allow, if followed in a methodological way, in a systematic way, to actually see where your biggest bang for bucks are, where you can actually make a bigger difference. And that is another approach or another consideration that comes into play. You mentioned the Henry Ford, the example that people would ask for horses. What I would like to think with that analogy comes out that, there is a way to further ask, maybe some refer to the why. So when you ask, what do you want? They call like more horses, but the third why, eventually they'll tell you that what they want is to go faster from A to B. So that's where you can invent the car. Because again, potentially the first answer is, I want another horse. But again, and so that makes me reflect, or, the importance of not stopping at the first answer, but trying to dig deeper and trying to understand what is at the core need of the coach or the athletes.
I think it's a really perceptive comment. I think that simply asking and engaging athletes and coaches, how's it feel? How's your training going? What are your goals? What does it feel like when you're competing? What are the concerns and worries? What are the things that you're emerging from your debrief that you want addressing? And then digging a bit deeper as to how did that play out on the day. That can also unveil the quality of information that you might want to address, but also creates rapport, it creates understanding, it creates appetite for them to take on board some of these concepts too.
100%.
Couple of questions then, just to wrap up. I mean, a couple of big ones, I suppose. But what's your commentary on how Australia have bounced back as an Olympic nation? I'm saying bouncing back from sort of Rio, London, where there was a lower level of certainly gold medals. Australia is a formidable nation, punching above its weight. Even then, capita. But what's your thoughts? Because Australia certainly had an incredible Olympics in Paris. What's your thoughts on what's underpinned that?
Yeah. I must say that I did spend some time reflecting on it and talking with colleagues, and probably I came up with more questions than answers, which
Classic researcher.
I agree, Australia, that great performance, both of the Olympics and Paralympics. I mean, we've seen amazing performances that we need to be very, very happy with. Some of the again thought that are around the impact of system and strategies on athletes, because clearly the IS has changed across the years, but every organization probably keeps changing, and new leadership brings some change. And so I guess you look at some success of athletes in many sports, their career might be 10 years ago, 10 years long. And so the question is is their performance linked to the last change of strategy or plan, or to what happened 10 years when they actually were selected, for example? That's a consideration. But then there are also sports where skateboard athletes are 14. So what is the impact of what we do, what we decide in Canberra in the life of a 14-year-old? One of again, it remains a question, but in conversation, someone noted how, again, this is in the Australian system, some medals were clustered almost in suburbs. So there is a suburb in Gold Coast which produced 2 gold medals in skateboarding. How is that even possible? What are the chances that if I remember their numbers right, but like 6 medals in swimming come from the same swimming club. And that could be different because some swimmers move to that club. But still, how fascinating is that an athlete, they move toward a coach. One of the possible hypothesis is that concept of pushing each other when you have like a bit of magic. There's no better description. I don't have a better one, but an environment where athletes push each other, and they just better each other, and they keep improving and they challenge. I think in one of the conversation I mentioned, someone else raised that in track and field, the sprinters, and here I'm not talking about Australia, but many are coached by the same person in the US, and they are in the same training environment. Being there is more important than a lot of other factors. So yeah. I don't have an answer, but it is fascinating. It would be nice to know what makes the medals.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I look from a distance. I haven't looked through the full tables, but swimming, kayaking, very strong performances in certain sports.
Yeah.
And so, looking forward then to Brisbane.
Yes.
This unusual situation that you have 11 years from announcement to hosting the games. You've got 2 pit stops along the way in Paris and Los Angeles. How are you looking forward, and how are you approaching maximizing the impact of science on those games?
Yeah. Well, when we found out that the amount of time we had, part of the conversation when it comes to that science and research space was about if you want look, and it's easy in sport to think about 4-year cycles. So we kind of told each other, like we discussed, having potentially like a discovery phase where we are looking at the more basic research and potentially work on in those infrastructure, how to make sure that we can work together. And this is a comment about 10 years ago, so a different system. But when I came to Australia, there was this applied physiology conference, first time I attended, and I had the impression that there were 4 PhD in 4 different states doing pretty much the same thing within their own team. And not a criticism, because again, everybody their idea, but there was a lot of competition within states in putting the athletes in the national team. So because it's a federated state, again, competition with other states. But now we have so that's a big system change. We have a system strategy. It's called HP32 plus, also known as WinWell, where for the first time 50 plus organizations are actually signed a strategy altogether, working toward the same goal. So that has been a system change, and I'll take it back to the science. So like we talked about science or research, one cycle where we work on the infrastructure, we build about that discovery. Then the following cycle could be more on the developing and innovating on what has been discovered, what has happened in the beginning, and eventually end up with the delivery. So as we go toward Brisbane, we need to turn up the implementation, turn up the fine tuning to then be able to actually see that science in the practice.
Okay, interesting. So you've stumbled across a similar approach that I've kind of created, probably within one cycle, where the innovation and the exploration is really high at the beginning of the cycle. And then the mid phase is about developing that protocol, and then it's about executing it towards the end of the cycle.
Yeah. I should acknowledge it's not nothing new in what I said. I do. When I was in a sport, it's very similar. A coach would tell me, in the last 6 months we are not training
Yes.
or trying anything new. Last 6 months is about delivery, etc. You walk back. So it's a similar concept. Yeah, stretched to the 11 years.
Yeah, good. Okay, so last question then, because you made a comment there. Win well.
Yeah.
What is the measure of a successful Olympic Paralympic sports program? Is it medals, or is it the manner in which they're delivered, or the role models that you're created? How's it measured?
Yeah. So WinWell as a strategy, which again is it's published, actually has like a specific page on measure of success. Now you are testing me. I do not remember all of them, but they talk about, there is a talk about medals, But medalists, breadth of sport. So the idea is that, we need to be successful in many sports to achieve the number of medals. Medalist, and breadth of sport. Those are the three when it comes to the, if you want, performance on the field. But then there are considerations about winning well when it comes to the well-being of the athletes. And we've had months of conversation about how to measure it, involving experts that they come from other fields in how to measure well-being, and it's not an easy answer. And there is the inspiration factors. If you want, our organization also sends some surveys out to sample of the population to understand if Olympians and Paralympians are inspiring, or if they're proud of what's happening at the games. So those measures will help building this big picture of what is success. So kind of actually all of the above. At least that's what is described in the strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot of evolution of what I guess mature systems are now going through of thinking. Is it all just about the metal that comes home, or is it all about the effect and what is sport for? It's quite a thoughtful, philosophical cycle that people are going through.
Now, I'm going to say the thing that gets me fired is that, we are talking about medals and medalists and winning well and breadth of sport. But then when we win a lot of gold medals and end up on top of higher in the medal tally, I guess, it's easy to look at the medal tally, even though that's technically is not what we committed to deliver. I think our goals and our measure of success are more important than the medal tally, because again, we talk about medals, not number of goals. But then when you win a lot of gold and your name is up there, clearly no one complains.
No, that's right. I think
but our measure are more holistic.
Yeah, working with the French system to help them prepare for Paris, and part of my conversation was, you need to make sure that the national anthem's playing a lot. That's a big focus. That should be part of the conversation. That should be part of the strategy, because those winning moments are the ones that people create that broader impression about how it went and how successful are we, alongside some incredible stories about athletes delivering genuine inspiration for their nation and their society.
Yeah, I agree. I guess paradoxically, in this hypothetical scenario, which will never happen, but if you win 100 medals and 0 gold, are Australian going to be inspired by being last in the medal tally? Well, that's what is your measure? But I think the winning well, it is an important one, and those success. We've seen some amazing success stories of athletes not winning medals, but that they've been in the media and they've been, I think, truly inspiring the next generation. So, and I think we need more of that.
Fantastic. Well, great note to wrap up on. Paolo, thanks so much for talking to me. It's been fascinating to hear about how you're approaching the work, really considered, really inspiring about the method, the approach, the breadth that you're bringing to your thinking, and more power to you. It's great to see Australia bounce back and hopefully a few more cycles of thriving ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having me. My call for feedback was genuine. So if any listener, if you have any idea and you tell, you can actually do better there, please reach out if you want to work with us or suggest things. I'm easy to reach and very interested in doing better.
Fantastic. We'll fill Paolo's inbox and connect with him on Twitter. All the links will be in the show notes. Paolo, thanks so much.
No, thank you again. Bye.
Brilliant.